The remake of Resident Evil 4 had high expectations to meet, given that it was a remake of a highly acclaimed title, which I think was able to deliver on, and then some. When it was first announced, many people were understandably doubtful about it and deemed it unnecessary. Admittedly, I was cautiously optimistic myself, but figured there was a good reason why they were going to remake it. Especially with the remakes for 2 and 3, I figured they'd probably add to the lore with the 4 remake to better connect to those two. It follows a fair amount of the same beats as the original Resident Evil 4, with a fair degree of changes, but not too many similarities where it feels like you're retreading the same game with a different coding. Nick Apostolides reprised his role as Leon from the Resident Evil 2 remake, and he absolutely killed it in this, I thought. Much like the original Resident Evil 4, this game takes place 6 years after Resident Evil 2, and you could hear the change in maturity in his voice. You can tell he's been through some stuff in those 6 years, especially after the Raccoon City incident, with this remake taking a darker, more serious approach than the original, as Leon makes a lot fewer quips compared to the 2005 release. I also liked Leon's relationship with Ashley in this remake, and the exchanges they'd share with each other. You can actually get to see more of Ashley's personality in this, and I actually like this version of Ashley more than the original. An unpopular opinion, I know. It was a nice addition the remake implemented, and really distinguished it from its source material. They also changed the Ashley following mechanic from the original, whereas in the original she'd either follow behind Leon or stand still. In the remake, she either follows closely behind Leon or slowly. She can't stand completely still like the original, but I felt like there's not too much use that I found for her to follow far behind. She can still hide, which is nice, and on top of that, she doesn't have a health bar anymore to worry about, but she can still get knocked down. If you've played the original, it'll probably take you the same amount of time just about to beat this. One thing I liked with this game is the knife system. They can be used to help deal a finishing blow, or even be used to parry against otherwise fatal attacks. You'll find kitchen knives or other more durable knives as you make your way through the game, so they're not too much of a rarity, and for your main knife you can even upgrade it and repair it when it breaks. Because of that system, I felt that I needed to save the knife for important things like finishing off a ganado or breaking out of a hold, which made it feel all the more necessary and impactful when I did use it. But I'd understand if other people didn't care about that system. I also like that there are some stealth elements incorporated as well, allowing you to tactically sneak up behind enemies and take them out swiftly. Even though stealth isn't required, it's still another option and way to play the game, which I think is really neat, giving you more freedom with how you approach some encounters. Given that Leon is a US agent, it doesn't seem too far-fetched that Leon has had some stealth training or has done some stealth missions in those 6 years. The movement is a bit different from the original Resident Evil 4, which makes sense given that it follows the same sort of gameplay that the 2 and 3 remakes established. So if you've played those, then it shouldn't be too different. I will say that I really had to be aware of my surroundings too. I don't know if it was just me, but I felt like there was a handful of moments where I was only focused on what was in front of me, and I'd end up getting grabbed or attacked by an enemy that would come up from behind. The merchant returns in a revamped system, allowing you to upgrade your knife and weapons much like the original, and it has a more streamlined menu design, as well as being able to buy health supplies or resources that you could use to craft bullets or grenades. You could also find the resources in the wild, of course, but it doesn't hurt to have the merchant as another option. There's also typewriters that are scattered near the merchant locations that can be used to customize your attaché case and store items. While playing, I really didn't think about how much sense it would make to serve as extra storage for weapons. It would be useful, especially to manage and store weapons in a potential Resident Evil 0 remake, which I talked about in a previous video. There's already some extra content in the form of the Mercenaries mode that was included after launch, as well as the Ada Wong DLC Separate Ways and possibly Assignment Ada that are likely to release soon enough, which I eagerly await for. Overall, it was a great experience and I've gotten a lot of enjoyment out of it. I have faith in possible remakes for 5 and 6, which, at this rate, it seems like they might end up happening. Now, in defense of the current remake culture, the idea of a remake is an interesting topic. It can either be underwhelming and not as revered as the original, or it can possibly even be equal, if not better. Despite having a video on why I think it'd be interesting to remake Resident Evil 0, I'm not one to call for remakes of everything. But honestly, I'm not entirely against it either if it feels like they could add something unique or different, whether that be gameplay-wise, character-wise, or even narrative-wise. There's a weird stigma against remakes. Maybe some of it is justified, maybe not. Especially when there often seems to be more calls for remasters, so why not remakes? Is it fear that the remake won't live up to the original? Or is it the fact that it's deemed unnecessary given that the original game is already great? Or even the fact that the time allocated to making the remake could be used toward making a new game? All of them are valid reasons. With a remake, it's a gamble of whether it can live up to the precedent the original game set. As for working on a new game, I'll take something over nothing, and if it isn't good, I won't play it. As a Persona fan, I've gotten used to waiting long periods before mainline releases at this point, but the enhanced ports and spin-offs that were released have helped. Who knows, maybe going back and remaking a game can serve as inspiration for future titles. And there's also no guarantee that just because a team isn't working on a remake, that they'll be able to finish a new game all the more quickly. I personally think remakes aren't always necessary, but if they happen, I won't be opposed. The reason being that often the original game is still going to be there, and often there are several ways to play it, such as the original Resident Evil 4, which was originally available on GameCube and then the PlayStation 2, and if that's not enough, it was also released on newer consoles such as the PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and so on. It's a slippery slope between wanting a remaster or a remake, but I won't really get into remasters in this video. The funny thing with the Resident Evil 1 through 4 remakes is the only remake that many probably consider a suitable replacement for the original would be the first one. An explanation could be that the original director, Shinji Mikami, directed both the original Resident Evil and its remake. So he was able to create more of what he originally intended, but was originally limited by with the technology at the time. Mikami also directed the original Resident Evil 4, but not the remake, which can possibly be a reason why the remake turned out the way it did. Aside from the timing of release and the amount of time between the original releasing and this remake, who knows, maybe there'll be a remake of the original Resident Evil again eventually. While I love the remake and consider it my favorite Resident Evil title, I would be interested in seeing how it would look if it was redone again. Would it replace my love for the original GameCube remake? That remains to be seen, especially since fans are already making their own fan versions of how a Resident Evil remake would be with the current format, along with Code Veronica. With the remakes of 2 through 4, they don't share the same directors as the original Resident Evil and its remake, but I feel like the remakes were able to create something different that stood apart from their source material. When Capcom remade Resident Evil 2, there was speculation on a remake of 3 happening, which did. Nobody expected 4 to get remade, but I don't think it was a wasted effort, as the remakes that Capcom made, and will most likely continue to make, seem to serve a purpose in the overall story they have planned. I think it should be okay for them to coexist with each other, with one not replacing the other, especially with how Resident Evil 4's remake made a fair bit of significant changes from the original. Even right off the bat, we see a difference between the two Leons with the introduction. In the original, Leon talks about the outbreak of the virus in Raccoon City, and gives a general synopsis of what happened in Resident Evils 1 through 3, from an almost outside perspective, feeling somewhat detached from it, at least I thought so. Whereas in the remake, Leon talks about what happened after the incident, being recruited by the government, and you could see that he's still dealing with the trauma from that night, conveying that he's been replaying that event in his mind on loop ever since it happened, wondering if he could have done anything differently. I also like how they changed the characterization of the main cast in the remake in comparison to the original game. Aside from expanding upon Leon's relationship with Ashley, there's also a change up to Leon's dynamic with Krauser, to a trainer-trainee relationship they have in this. It might seem insignificant, but another aspect I thought was interesting was how Leon and Ashley getting cured is different between the two. In the original, Leon is cured first and Ashley second, but the reverse is true for the remake. Both are reasonable ways to go about it, and I'm not saying one was executed better than the other, but both are good and make sense given the context of how the events in their respective stories play out. I could go on, but I feel I already made my point already and don't want to drag the video on longer. Those are my thoughts on the matter, but let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Let me know where you may agree or disagree with some of my points, as well as points you want me to elaborate on. Or if Resident Evil 4 being remade was justifiable, or any game or games that do or don't deserve a remake, and I'll be sure to reply. I look forward to seeing what you guys think about not only my video, but the Resident Evil 4 remake and the remake culture happening right now with Resident Evil. But that's it for this video. Have a good one.